So now let's just take a minute to go over some simple design elements that'll be useful to us when we go forward and design our very first bonsai. First, going back to that concept of wabi-sabi, it's important to note that most of the trees we will encounter in bonsai are shaped in imperfect asymmetrical triangles known as scalene triangles. Likewise, most of the trees will also be potted to one side of the container or the other, and very rarely, if ever, potted directly in the center of the container. The only exception to this is if we're using trees in round pots or other pots that have equal sides. The next useful tip is to realize that we not only view that scalene triangle from the front of the design, but we also view one to the sides, having the short side to the front, and also to the top of the tree, if I can tip that up. Another important note is that in the traditional teachings, such as John Naka's books, the pads are actually subdivided into small diamonds or scalene triangles as well. So one easy way to kind of think of bonsai, at least in the beginning when you're getting started, is you're just subdividing scalene triangles time and time again. Next, let's talk about a few design cues that'll aid us in convincing the viewer they're seeing a mature tree in miniature rather than an immature piece of material. The first place we look is at the bottom of the tree, at the buttressing surface roots known as the nabari. These roots add visual weight to the tree, as well as representing what we would see in nature on mature old trees. When seeing old trees in nature, oftentimes we almost trip over the roots when walking around the trunk, whereas immature young trees that have just been planted will see the soil almost collared up around it with no roots visible, no roots having been elevated at this point. The next tool we use to convince the eye it's seeing a mature tree in miniature is the use of horizontal branches. On old trees, typically as branches age, they build up weight by amassing more and more foliage over time. Likewise, things like snow and wind can also impact the branch placement over time. So large, big, mature branches typically won't be upright pointing up at the sun as these juvenile branches are. So one easy way to kind of start to convince the eye that we're seeing an older tree in miniature is to start placing these branches down on planes. Now, the degree at which we'll place a branch horizontal largely has to do with our artistic inclinations as well as the species we're working with. If we're trying to convey a natural feeling or an accurate representation of a tree, then if we're working with an oak tree or deciduous material, we may want the branches growing from the base of the trunk up and slowly working their way up and out. Likewise, if we're working with conifer material and we want to show kind of extreme wind or environmental factors, we may sweep these branches down. So as you can see on this example, this one's more in a directly horizontal frame, which is also appropriate to show maturity and age. Lastly, I want to discuss the use of taper in bonsai design, as this is probably our most useful element in convincing the eye and seeing maturity or age in our bonsai. On mature trees or trees that we'll encounter in nature, all of them will grow oldest at the base here and youngest at the top of the tree. Likewise, the branches will also be oldest nearest the trunk and youngest out at the tips of the branch. This will naturally, on most trees, give them a taper where they're fattest at the base and skinniest at the top. Likewise, fattest at the collar of the branch and skinniest at the tips. This natural taper is built into the tree over a course of many, many years by pruning back systematically to younger growth and allowing that growth to grow out before it too is then pruned back and grown back out. So taper is probably the one thing that beginners have the hardest time with accepting, is the fact that a lot of the tree, if you are going to wire it out and whatnot, will have to be cut back at a later date to build taper into the design. So now that we've discussed the nabari, bringing branches horizontal, as well as incorporating taper into the overall design, let's go ahead and talk about the architecture or recipe we're going to use when we go forward and build our trees. So one of the first recipes or architectures I used when getting into bonsai that was greatly helpful is known as the rule of threes. Essentially, we're going to break the tree into three different parts: a lower third, a middle third, and then a top third. And each area is going to have a set of rules that dictates how we treat that section of the tree. So here at the bottom third, this is going to be reserved for just Nabari and the first movement of the tree known as the Tachiagari. So essentially no branches should emerge at the first third. Moving on to the middle third, this is what I refer to as framing branches because we will have no branches coming out of the front of the design that we have selected. We will, however, have branches growing to the left, the back, and the right, or the right, back, and left. Now, although that's the traditional branch structure, it's important to note that we don't have to position them in any particular order. What's important to note is that to create a triangle, our scalene triangle, we have to have branches in 3 dimensions. So we'll need branches growing from one side of the tree, the other side of the tree, and also to the rear for depth. Moving on to the top, this is the last third, and this is known as the apex. This is the area where branches are now allowed to grow at the observer, and we also have them growing to the left, the right, and to the back of the design. So another way of thinking of it is branches are growing 360, and this is the area where we want to obscure viewing of the trunk for the observer. So there should be no way to view into the top third when it's complete. So just a quick summary of that: no branches for the first third, left, right, and back, or right, left, back for the middle third with nothing to the front, and then a full 360 at the top, obscuring the view to the viewer. So one thing I often get asked is why choose a front of the design? Why have a front versus just viewing the tree from all sides? And the answer to that is usually pretty logical. Is the tree won't be as interesting from all sides. There will be a side that has the most interest or is making the most use of the material. And so if we even look at this tree quickly and we turn to the side, you can see even if I were to regrow branches, it's not the best movement of the trunk, and we're seeing more of a straight line rather than curvature. And so to me, that is lost aesthetic value. It's not necessarily wrong, but we're missing out on a potential area of interest for our eye, which is that curve at the base. So choosing the front is basically highlighting that area for the observer. And so one of the ways that we open up the front for the observer is our first 2 branches are usually positioned slightly towards the observer, as well as an overall bowing or leaning of the tree towards the observer as well. I liken this to body language. If I was leaned back, reserved like this, you wouldn't be as apt to approach me and talk to me. Whereas if I'm leaning in and I'm saying, hey guys, come on in, how's it going? You're much more likely to be welcomed in and to approach. So that's the theory that we're going for when designing a front. Okay, so that's gonna wrap up our very first video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. We have plans to release a lot more content focusing on the creation of bonsai and the art of bonsai. So stay tuned, like, and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one. See ya.